My wife said our son was mine. A DNA test destroyed my entire family. I raised my son for 22 years believing he was mine. When a hospital error forced DNA tests, I learned my brother was the real father, and my wife had known all along. The betrayal split the family, forced ugly truths, and pushed me toward an unexpected form of closure and self-respect. The envelope felt heavier than paper should ever feel. I was standing in the hospital corridor when I noticed my hands trembling, the fluorescent lights humming above me like a distant swarm of bees. The nurse had smiled politely when she handed it over. Routine paperwork, she'd said, but something in the way my name was printed across the front made my stomach tighten. Thick black letters. Too bold, too final. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I leaned against the cold wall, listening to muffled sounds of rolling carts and distant coughing, trying to steady my breathing. My reflection stared back at me in the glass of a framed health poster. Graying temples, tired eyes, the faint crease between my brows that had deepened over the years from smiling too hard or worrying too much. I looked like a man who had lived a full, honest life. I believed that about myself. At that moment, I had no idea that a few printed lines inside that envelope would erase everything I thought I knew about my family. Before all of this, my life was quiet in the best way. I'd been married to Elaine for 24 years. We met in our 20s at a friend's backyard barbecue. She spilled lemonade on my shoes and laughed so hard she nearly cried while apologizing. I married that laugh. I built a life around it. We raised our son, Marcus, in a small 2-story house that always smelled faintly of coffee grounds and laundry detergent. Marcus was 22 now, freshly graduated from college, still leaving his sneakers by the front door no matter how many times Elaine reminded him not to. On Sunday mornings, he'd wander into the kitchen half awake, hair sticking up in every direction, and steal bacon straight from the pan when he thought I wasn't looking. "Dad, you cook it better when you pretend not to see me," he'd grin. Those moments anchored. They reminded me who I was. A husband, a father, a man who showed up. I worked as a logistics manager at a regional shipping company. Nothing glamorous, but steady. My hands always smelled faintly of cardboard and ink by the end of the day. Elaine ran a small interior design business from home, her sketches pinned to corkboards in the spare room. Evenings were predictable, in a comforting way. Dinner at 6:30, the news humming quietly in the background, Marcus scrolling on his phone while Elaine told me about clients who couldn't decide between beige and slightly different beige. Ordinary, warm, safe. If there were cracks, I didn't see them, or maybe I didn't want to. The first odd thing came disguised as good news. Marcus had gone to the hospital for a routine physical required for a new job. He mentioned offhand that the hospital was running a pilot program to cross-check patient records after discovering a batch of mislabeled newborn blood samples from 2 decades ago. As part of the cleanup, they were offering free genetic verification tests to affected families. "Kinda wild, right?" Marcus said, chewing on a granola bar. "They might have mixed up babies back in the early 2000s. Elaine's hand froze mid-wipe on the kitchen counter. It was so small I almost missed it. Just a pause. A breath held a second too long. She recovered quickly. "Hospitals make mistakes sometimes," she said lightly. "I'm sure it's nothing," Marcus shrugged. "They're sending the results by mail to all 3 of us, just in case. Dad, you'll probably get something too." I nodded, more focused on the coffee brewing than anything else. It felt like trivia. Interesting, distant, irrelevant to our lives. But later that night, when I passed the bedroom, I noticed Elaine sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark. The lamp was off. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her hands folded together like she was praying. "You okay?" I asked softly. She startled, then forced a smile. "Just tired." She crawled into bed and turned her back to me, something she almost never did. I told myself she'd had a long day. Still, the image lingered, her silhouette against the faint glow of street light through the curtains. So still, so closed off. Over the next few days, little things shifted. Elaine checked the mailbox earlier than usual, sometimes twice. She jumped when the mail truck rattled down the street. She asked Marcus too many questions about when the hospital said the results would arrive. "You're acting like you're waiting for a jury verdict," Marcus joked one afternoon. She laughed, but the sound didn't reach her eyes. I tried to dismiss the unease crawling up my spine. After decades of marriage, you learn to sense when something is off, like a draft in a closed room, but you also learn how easy it is to invent ghosts where there are none. Then the envelope arrived. My name printed clean and official. My pulse thudded in my ears as
I pushed off the wall and slowly peeled the flap open. Whatever was inside had already begun to change me. I just didn't know how yet. I didn't read it in the hallway. Some instinct, maybe fear, maybe denial, told me I needed walls around me when I opened that envelope. I folded it under my arm and walked out into the late afternoon sun, the air smelling faintly of asphalt and distant rain. The parking lot shimmered with heat, cars ticking softly as their engines cooled. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light stretched into a small eternity. I kept glancing at the envelope on the passenger seat like it might move on its own. When I finally pulled into the driveway, Elaine's car was already there. The curtains were drawn halfway, the living room lamp already on even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. I sat in the car for a full minute before going inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. Elaine stood at the kitchen sink rinsing the same mug over and over, water splashing against porcelain. "Elaine?" I said gently. She flinched so hard the mug nearly slipped from her hands. "Oh, you're home," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. Her eyes flicked to my hands, to the envelope. Something passed across her face. Fear, recognition, resignation, gone in a blink, but not before it landed heavy in my chest. "I got the results," I said. Her shoulders sagged a fraction of an inch. "Already?" she whispered. I nodded and pulled out a chair, sitting slowly like my knees had aged 10 years in the last hour. My fingers slid under the flap. The paper inside felt crisp, official, indifferent. I unfolded it. The words didn't make sense at first. Percentages, genetic markers, probability values. Then my eyes landed on the sentence that cracked the world open. Probability of paternity 0.00. I reread it 3 times, my mouth going dry. 0. Not low, not uncertain. 0. A hollow sound escaped my throat, something between a laugh and a choke. This has to be wrong." Elaine didn't answer. I looked up at her. She was gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles had turned pale.
Tears pooled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. "Elaine?" My voice barely worked. "Tell me this is a mistake." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Her lips trembled. "I didn't want you to find out like this." The room tilted. "What do you mean, like this?" She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I always hoped it would stay buried." The words hit harder than any shout could have. My heart began pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. "Stay buried, Elaine? Whose child is Marcus?" She swallowed, eyes still shut. "Your brother." The sound my chair made scraping against the tile was sharp and ugly as I stood up. "My what?" I whispered. "David," she said. "It was David." My brother's name felt foreign in my mouth, like a splinter. "No," I said automatically. "That's not possible." "It was one night," she rushed, words tumbling out through sobs. 23 years ago. You were working double shifts. We were arguing all the time. He was staying with us after his divorce. We drank too much. It was stupid and wrong, and I hated myself the next morning." I raised my hand, my whole body shaking. "Stop!" The walls felt like they were closing in. The ticking clock above the fridge suddenly sounded like a hammer against my skull. "You knew?" I asked quietly. "All these years you knew?" She nodded, collapsing into a chair. "When I found out I was pregnant, the timing, I realized. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell you. I convinced myself Marcus was yours in every way that mattered." I stared at her like she was a stranger wearing my wife's face. "You let me raise my brother's son for 22 years without telling me?" Her sobs broke loose now, loud and messy. "I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid of destroying everything." A bitter laugh tore out of me. "You destroyed it anyway." The front door opened then. Marcus walked in, backpack slung over one shoulder, humming to himself. "Hey, what's for—" He stopped when he saw Elaine crying and my face drained of color. "What happened?" My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Elaine looked at him, eyes wide with panic. "Marcus, sweetheart." I couldn't let her say it. I turned to my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the young man whose graduation I'd cried through, and forced the words out. "The test says I'm not your biological father." His face went blank. "What?" Elaine sobbed harder. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." He looked between us, confusion giving way to shock. "Mom, what is he talking about?" My voice shook. "Your biological father is my brother."
The room went utterly silent. Marcus's mouth opened slightly. He looked like the floor had disappeared beneath him. "No," he whispered. "That's not funny." Elaine reached for him. He stepped back. "You're lying," he said, his voice rising. "You have to be lying." "I wish I was," I said. His eyes filled with tears as he stared at Elaine. "Mom?" She nodded. The sound that came out of him then wasn't a word. It was a broken, wounded noise that seemed to tear straight through my chest. In that moment, I realized the test hadn't just destroyed my marriage. It had shattered my son's identity and everything my family thought it was built on. Marcus didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He just stood there, staring at the floor, like the answers might be hiding in the grout lines between the tiles. "I need air," he finally muttered, his voice hollow. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, soft and final. Elaine collapsed into sobs, her hands covering her face. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, the paper still crumpled in my fist, my heart thudding like it was trying to escape my rib cage.
"You should have told me," I said quietly. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I loved you." I turned away, suddenly nauseous. Love felt like the wrong word now, like calling a wound a gift. I walked out onto the back porch, the cool evening air biting at my skin. The smell of damp grass and distant barbecue smoke drifted from somewhere down the street. My hands shook as I leaned against the railing. David, my younger brother, the one who borrowed my tools and never returned them, the one who crashed on our couch after his divorce, drinking too much and complaining about how unfair life was, the one I defended 100 times when others said he was irresponsible. Images flickered through my mind, him holding Marcus as a newborn, laughing at family barbecues, offering to babysit when Elaine and I wanted a night out. Had he known all along? Had he ever looked at my son and thought, "That's mine"? Anger surged hot and sudden in my chest, followed by something colder, betrayal layered on betrayal. I pulled out my phone and stared at David's name in my contacts. My thumb hovered over the call button. Then I lowered it. Not yet. Marcus didn't come home that night. He texted me around midnight, "Staying at Jake's. Need time." I didn't reply. I didn't know what words could possibly help. Elaine slept on the couch. I didn't ask her to move. The space in our bed felt like a canyon anyway. The house creaked and settled through the night, every familiar sound suddenly foreign. I barely slept, just drifted in and out of shallow dreams where Marcus was a toddler again, reaching for my hand in a crowded mall, calling me Dad. Morning came gray and heavy. I brewed coffee I didn't drink. The smell just sat in the air, bitter and mocking. Elaine watched me from the couch, her eyes swollen and red. "We should talk to Marcus together," she said quietly. I didn't look at her. "You should give him space." She nodded, biting her lip. Around noon, I finally called David. He answered on the third ring, cheerful. "Hey, big brother, what's up?" My jaw clenched so hard it ached. "We need to talk, now." Something in my tone must have cut through his casualness. Okay, what's going on?" "Come over." An hour later, his truck pulled into the driveway. He walked in carrying the faint smell of motor oil and cheap cologne, smiling uncertainly. "You sound like somebody died." I stared at him. "Marcus took a DNA test," I said. His face flickered just for a split second, a tightening around the eyes. A breath caught. The room went very still. "And?" he asked cautiously. "And it says I'm not his biological father." David swallowed. Silence stretched. "Elaine told me it was you," I said. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I never wanted this to come out." My vision blurred with rage. "You knew?" He nodded slowly. "I suspected. The timing, the way he looked like me when he was little. Elaine begged me not to say anything. She said it would destroy you." A bitter laugh escaped me. "So you both decided to lie to me for 22 years? "I stayed away," he said defensively. "I moved across town. I didn't interfere. You came to birthdays. You held him at Christmas. You drank my beer and sat at my table knowing he was your son." His face crumpled. I was ashamed. "Funny," I snapped. "Didn't stop you from enjoying the benefits of being an uncle instead of owning up to being a father." He looked at the floor. I didn't think I deserved him. That sentence landed like a dull thud. Maybe it was true. Maybe none of us deserved the damage we'd done. "You're going to tell Marcus the truth," I said. "Not through me, not through his mother, from you." David hesitated. "He hates me already, doesn't he?" "You earned whatever he feels." He nodded slowly. "Okay." After he left, the house felt even emptier. That evening, Marcus finally came home. His eyes were red, his movements stiff, like he was carrying invisible weight. We sat at opposite ends of of the couch. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said quietly. "Was any of it real?" I swallowed. Everything we shared was real. He looked at me then, eyes glistening. "You're still my dad, right?" The question nearly broke me. I moved closer and put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the familiar solidity of him, the warmth, always. He leaned into me for just a second, not a hug, but something close, and I felt a fragile thread of hope flicker in the wreckage. But the storm wasn't over yet. The truth still had to face the light. David met Marcus 2 days later at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and old vinyl booths, where the waitresses called everyone hun and the windows were streaked with years of fingerprints and sunlight. I didn't go inside. I sat in my truck across the street, watching through the fogged windshield as the two of them slid into a booth near the window. Marcus sat stiffly, arms crossed. David leaned forward, nervous, his hands wrapped tightly around a chipped coffee mug. Even from a distance, I could sense the tension pressing against the glass. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I watched David's shoulders slump. Marcus shook his head sharply at one point, pushing his plate away untouched. At another moment, David reached out tentatively, only to pull his hand back like he'd touched something hot. Finally, Marcus stood up abruptly and walked out of the diner. He didn't look toward my truck. He just walked straight past it and down the sidewalk, his jaw clenched, fists shoved deep into his pockets. David stayed inside for a long time after that. When Marcus came home later that evening, the house felt heavy with unspoken words. "He admitted everything," Marcus said quietly as he set his keys on the counter. "Said he was sorry. Said he didn't think he deserved me." I waited. "He asked if he could be part of my life," Marcus continued, his voice tight. "I told him I needed time, maybe a lot of time." I nodded. "That's fair." Marcus leaned against the counter, rubbing his eyes. "Elaine called me 6 times today." I didn't respond. "I'm not ready to talk to her yet," he said. "Take your time." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was memorizing my face. "You're the only stable thing I have right now." The words both comforted and terrified me, because stability was something I wasn't sure I could even provide for myself anymore. The truth didn't stay contained for long. Elaine's sister noticed the tension during a family dinner we awkwardly attempted a week later. Marcus didn't show. Elaine barely touched her food. My hands shook as I cut into a piece of dry chicken. "What's going on with you two?" her sister finally asked. "You look like someone died." Elaine's eyes filled with tears instantly. I set my fork down. "The hospital discovered a mistake from years ago," I said calmly. "Marcus isn't biologically mine." The table went silent. Elaine broke down then, confessing everything in fractured sobs. Her sister's face drained of color. Her mother pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Word traveled fast after that. Not in dramatic explosions, but in hushed phone calls, tight voices, long pauses. David's side of the family found out next. My mother called me late one night, crying softly. "How could this happen?" she kept asking, like there was a logical answer waiting to be discovered. Neighbors noticed when David stopped coming to Sunday barbecues.
Friends sensed something was off when Elaine withdrew from social gatherings, and Marcus declined invitations he'd normally accept. No one judged loudly, but quiet judgment can be heavier than shouting. Elaine faced consequences that weren't cruel, but they were real. Invitations slowed, trust shifted, people looked at her differently, not with hatred, but with cautious distance. The comfortable familiarity she once enjoyed was replaced with polite formality. At home, the tension became unbearable. We spoke only when necessary. Logistics, groceries, bills. One night, Elaine finally said, "Are you going to leave me?" The question hung between us like fragile glass. I stared at the wall, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. "I don't know." She nodded slowly, absorbing the uncertainty like a slow bruise. "I'll accept whatever you decide. But forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process that demands honesty, time, and willingness. And sometimes, even then, it doesn't arrive." I began seeing a therapist, mostly because the anger inside me had nowhere healthy to go. I talked about betrayal, identity, the strange grief of losing a truth I'd never questioned. Marcus started therapy too. Watching him walk into that office, shoulders tense, eyes tired, nearly broke me. No parent wants their child to carry pain they helped create. David faded into the background. He respected Marcus's need for space. He stopped calling me altogether. In some ways, the distance felt merciful. Months passed. The sharp edges of the shock softened, replaced by a dull, persistent ache. One evening, Marcus and I sat on the back porch watching the sun dip below the trees. Crickets chirped softly. The air smelled like cut grass. "I've been thinking," Marcus said. "Blood doesn't make someone a dad. Showing up does." My throat tightened. "I agree."
He looked at me and smiled faintly. You showed up. In that quiet moment, I realized that while the truth had dismantled our family as we knew it, it hadn't destroyed everything. Something new, fragile, honest, imperfect, was beginning to take shape. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was the silence that followed it. The house slowly learned new rhythms. Elaine woke earlier than she used to, moving quietly through the kitchen like a guest in her own home. I started taking longer walks after dinner, letting the cool evening air rinse the tightness from my chest. Marcus picked up extra shifts at work, not to escape us, I could tell, but to rebuild something inside himself that had been shaken loose. We were all learning how to live inside a truth none of us had asked for. Elaine and I eventually sat down across from each other at the dining table one rainy Sunday afternoon. The windows were streaked with water, the room dim and gray, matching the weight between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said softly, "but I owe you honesty now, all of it." And she gave it to me. She told me how lonely she'd felt when Marcus was conceived, how I'd been working endless overtime, how David had been sleeping on our couch after his divorce, how the house had felt crowded and empty at the same time. She didn't excuse what she'd done, she owned it. She spoke about shame that never fully left her, about the fear of blowing up a family she desperately wanted to preserve. Listening didn't heal the wound, but it helped me understand the shape of it. "I loved you," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I still do." I believed her. Love doesn't always protect people from making devastating choices. Sometimes it exists alongside them, tangled and flawed. "I can't promise we'll survive this," I told her honestly, "but I'm willing to try counseling for clarity, for respect." Relief crossed her face like sunlight breaking through clouds. We didn't rush anything. Trust rebuilds in inches, not miles. Marcus slowly found his footing too. He began opening up more about the confusion, the anger, the strange guilt he carried for hurting me just by existing. We talked late some nights, sitting on the couch with mugs of tea growing cold in our hands. "I feel like two stories collided inside me," he once said, "and now I have to decide which one defines me. You get to write your own," I told him. He smiled at that. Months later, Marcus made the choice to meet David again, on his terms, not anyone else's. I stayed out of it completely. That was his territory now. When he came home afterward, he didn't say much, just that the conversation had been calm, honest, unfinished. "I don't know what he'll be to me," Marcus said, "but I know who you are." That was enough. As for me, something unexpected happened in the wreckage. I began to rediscover myself, not just as a husband or a father, but as a man with boundaries, worth, and agency. I returned to old hobbies I'd neglected. I repaired the old motorcycle in the garage. I reconnected with friends I'd slowly drifted away from over the years. I laughed again. Real laughter, not the polite kind you use to keep the peace. Pain, when processed instead of buried, has a strange way of sharpening clarity. Elaine and I continued counseling. Some days felt hopeful, others felt heavy. We learned to communicate without hiding, without pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Whether our marriage would ultimately survive remained uncertain, but whatever happened, it would be built on truth, not fear, and that mattered. One evening, nearly a year after the envelope arrived, Marcus and I stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes together like we always had. He stole one straight from the pan and burned his fingers slightly. "Still worth it," he laughed, shaking his hand. I watched him, this young man I had raised, loved, shaped, and felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. Biology hadn't made him my father. Love had. The betrayal had cracked my world open, but it also forced me to choose something deeper than comfort, self-respect, honesty, resilience, and unconditional love that didn't depend on DNA. Life didn't give me back what I lost. It gave me something different, something more grounded, more real. Sometimes truth doesn't come to punish us. It comes to free us. And maybe that's the lesson hiding inside all of this, that identity isn't written in blood alone, but in presence, in consistency, in the quiet decision to keep loving, even when it hurts. If you were in my place, would you have stayed and tried to rebuild, or would you have walked away to protect your peace? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing or supporting the channel. Your presence means more than you know.